Welcome to the Truth in the Public Square podcast, a podcast dedicated to equipping Christians to engage culture and politics for the glory of God and the common good. I'm your host, Harrison Lang, and on today's podcast, I am joined once again by TPS's own Isaiah Callerman for an episode on Christianity and the family. Isaiah, along with his role at TPS, serves as Director of Communications at the Beza Institute and is currently pursuing graduate studies. Isaiah, thank you for joining us on the podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. If you wouldn't mind just giving the listeners, a brief little just information and just where you're at in your current season of life.
Yeah, absolutely. A couple years ago now, almost, I graduated from Spurgeon College. Harrison and I know each other from our time there and studied philosophy, have been interested in politics and economics and American history and how Christianity interacts with those subjects for some time, and excited to be a part of what we're doing here at Truth in Public Square.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. In this episode, I would like us to have a conversation about why Truth in the Public Square is committed to the family. As we've stated in the past and on our website, we have six primary commitments: historical Christianity, federalism, social and fiscal conservatism, Christian patriotism, and then also the family. And so in this episode, I did want to have why is it such an essential part to what we want to do in this organization. And so I think a good way to start this conversation is, what is the family? How would you and how do we define the family?
Great question. Um, we define the family as, first of all, starts with marriage of one man and one woman uh, for life, who, if God permits, are fruitful and multiply, bear children, and run a household to glorify God. There's many different realities that we could talk about at work there. There's the just simple relationship of family to one another. There's the covenantal relationship between husband and wife before God. There's the family in relation to the political order, which is very important, as I'm sure we will discuss. But the family is central in so many ways to our understanding, uh, just in general, of our Christian doctrine of mankind, our theological anthropology, but also our Christian political theology and how we think um, government should be structured and operated. So,
Mm. Yeah, if the family has been ordained by God, it's not a human construct. It is something that is divine in origin, rather than merely created out of man's own wisdom. And so, it is very important for us to have a working definition and a proper definition of the family, and then ultimately how it will help us to rightly understand, um, yeah, how rightly understanding the family helps us understand and be involved in politics in the proper way. Um, how does Scripture present um, that the family structure is the most basic unit of society? I know that's something that you're passionate about, Isaiah, and I think that you have some helpful comments on, how family is the most basic unit of society.
well, if we go back to the book of Genesis, we see that, you know, man and the creation as a whole is incomplete until you have a marriage. Um, God creates Adam and says it is not good. The first time he says something is not good in the creation account is the fact that man is alone, and so he creates the woman. And creation, in a sense, obviously, there's the chronology continues, but um, there's a completion there brought about through marriage. And the first command God gives to mankind is one that he gives to them as male and female together, to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Obviously, something that isolated individuals can't do. And so I think it's helpful to think of the family as, the most fundamental unit of just in general of humanity, but obviously uh, in particular political orders as well. And so looking to the pages of scripture, that's, I think, a good place to start.
No, for sure, and that kind of gets us onto the conversation of the doctrine of creation and the family and how they are so interconnected, and that's the foundation for the family. Is that God has said that 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 He has joined two people together, a man and a woman together, that may no one ever separate, and so and anything that goes against that would obviously ultimately breed destruction. And so there's a reason that even if a biblically qualified divorce, through adultery or abandonment, that is going to cause and bring about long lasting pain and difficulty for that person's both parties life. And if there's offspring, it's going to cause destruction and issues, whether or not that it was permitted in Scripture. And so it's really helpful for what you have said about God's ordered plan for family and how it is the most basic foundation for part of society. I would pose the question: how does our understanding of the family, the biblical understanding of the family, promote human flourishing? And so think of this, in the local structure and then beyond to the wider culture. Why is the family so essential for promoting human flourishing?
That's a great question, and one that's very relevant in many ways to politics today in the United States. Um, as the family, as we discussed, kind of is this basic building block of society. Um, it really is the um, the household, I will say, is the place where um, so much of just day to day human life revolves around it. And everyone, even if you spend your whole life single, at one point you lived in a household with other people when you were a child, most likely, and um, you were formed and influenced in for better or worse in many ways through that experience. Um, and so, uh, yeah, there's so many layers to this. There's obviously it. I think living together with other people who you did not choose, especially thinking about siblings and parents,
Mm-hmm.
it teaches many important lessons, both about the Christian life, but also about political life. We don't get to choose what country we're born into. We have some say in who gets to govern us, but sometimes who we personally wish was in power isn't, and so there's lessons to be learned there. And then between husband and wife, there's a lesson learned of that uh, plays out in the political sphere of seeing another person's good as your own and pursuing that together, kind of the sense of a common good on a micro scale.
Mm-hmm.
So there's so many ways in which the household forms people, and either for good or ill, but as Christians, we hope, um, you know, through participating in the church and the ministry of the word, learning uh, to embody Christian virtue and but also learning invaluable lessons that pertain to citizenship and life in the political order.
Yeah, totally, 100%. With you. If you look at a father, how good he is as a father, will be how as good of a citizen he will be, and most likely his sons and daughters will be. And so, everything from the family when it comes to building those relationships, is upstream from the political and cultural engagement from fellow citizens. And so that kind of brings us on to the next question. What do we ultimately lose culturally and politically when the family is weakened or redefined? And so I think, every issue that we have currently going on, when it's from Obergefell in 2015, how that's caused destruction, and also think about how over the past 2 years you have um, homosexual couples who are now adopting children. Think about the transgender movement. What happens to us culturally when the family is weakened or redefined?
Yeah, destructive in so many ways. I when the family, I think we can say from a modern perspective, apart from the Christian vision, tends to view the family as an arrangement for some combination of convenience and pleasure, and the obligations that each person within that family unit, have to each other is essentially to continue to fulfill those um, those desires for some sort of mutually um, pleasant and convenient arrangement. It's there's not much to it other than that. There's no kind of sacred covenantal nature to things. There's really not much of a lasting obligation there. It's a really just a contract that can be terminated at any time. Um, in some ways, marriage today is viewed as more casually than many business contracts, I would argue,
Mm-hmm.
um, where, essentially for any reason whatsoever, it can be just broken off. And if that's the case, it just introduces um, so many hazards, especially for children. Obviously, there's harm to adults who engage in, you know, sin sexually or through, illegitimate divorce. There's certainly harm that comes to the adults who live against God's design for marriage and family. But ultimately, it's the brunt of it often falls on children,
Mm-hmm.
who either have to deal with a life deprived of a cohesive, two-parent household, which has many, uh, you know, negative effects. If you even just looking at just, you know, fairly empirical, um, you know, scientific analysis, that there's negative effects there when that happens.
Mm-hmm.
um, but often, things can be much worse, especially as you mentioned. Excuse me. You know, I think when the family unit, especially I think in the case of same-sex marriage, becomes something really simply for the satisfaction of lusts that are totally depraved and contrary to God's design.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes, that can lead to the abuse of children for the same, in pursuit of the same things. And we see examples of that very sadly in the news. And that's why I think this matters so much. I think many people were lulled into thinking back in the 20 teens that, oh, this is, just about, the redefinition of marriage is just kind of about letting people do what they want to do and,
Mm-hmm.
not uh,
Social
uh,
libertarianism.
exactly. And the idea, which was, many people warned of, that this creates a slippery slope into all kinds of new moral problems, was dismissed. Oh, that's illogical. That's a slippery slope. Well, turns out there was something to that. Other thing, when you're looking at the moral logic inherent in something and saying, well, if we accept this idea, then we're opening the door. We've eliminated our moral category that really keeps us from allowing these other, moral evils, and that kind of slippery slope is very real, and it's quite logical to make an appeal to that. And so I think we have seen firsthand how kind of taking this um, ambivalent view of the family and really watering it down to just kind of just something that two people get together and decide to have on a piece of paper, and there's not much more to it than that. There's no moral obligations really. We see that has a lot of negative effects downstream for both uh, the adults who participate, but also for children. So
Yes, I mean, simply put, building on what you said, simply put, when the family is weakened or redefined, all that happens is cultural chaos. And where there's destruction, every bit and piece of society and culture is taken away from us. And so I think, one thing when we think about, because I would, a couple years ago, especially when I would say I was a new Christian and I was a, staunch political conservative, I would have been in that libertarian, um, thought process. I'm like, hey, I really don't, I really do not care what other people are doing, in their own bedrooms. It's like none of my business. I don't really care, and so like I really still don't care. I don't like either of us, and the Christian right isn't really saying like we really don't want to know what's going on in your like sexual life. That's not our concerns, but it's everything downstream of that is our concerns. Is number one is what you're doing is unrighteous. It's against the will of God. It's an abomination before the Creator of the universe. But everything downstream of what you are doing is, you know, breeding destruction, and so and confusion. And so when it comes to, I think, an important conversation today is what about when two homosexual men adopt a baby? Why is that wrong? Why is that not good for society? Because aren't we happy that this infant now has a home? It's like, well, firstly, frankly, it's probably through IVF now, or it's some um, it's not the most vulnerable or most needed orphans that are being adopted by the LGBTQ community. It's usually one of them is being the biological father or mother through um, IVF. But what you're doing is either the natural mother or the natural father. You are taking them away, especially in the male homosexual relationship. You're taking away the natural born mother instantly away from the child. And so, that's problem number one. And then problem number two, I think that, we're both complementarian. That's a strong commitment for TPS, is that we're complementarian. The sexes complement each other. And so you are forsaking that child from a nurturing mother. And then, we could go on and on for why that breeds destruction. And so this is not just merely about two people in their own bedroom. This is everything to do with what's valuable and important in life when it comes to children, when it comes to culture, and just a flourishing society. Um, but moving forward, I think it's been a while on that, but how does the family form a moral imagination or virtue and responsibility in ways that any other institution, a form of government, cannot?
the family is God's provided means of God's provided primary means of caring for the individual and providing, especially thinking of children, providing a context for growth and learning and training in virtue and in just understanding how to walk through life. Obviously, um, it's been said that it takes a village to raise a child, and there's some element of truth in that. Two parents, there's some things that two parents by themselves can't provide, but the most essential things, you know, the parents certainly need support from other people, and this is one of the reasons why we value the local church. But the household, um, children under the leadership of their mother and father, um, I think God has um, really designed the household to function in a way that's very unique and is pretty much impossible to replicate. Um, I don't know. Um, I think there's many different facets of this. It's hard to kind of encapsulate, I think, in one quick go at it, but just the way in which um, parents uh, have insights into what is best for their children that other people do not have, I guess, to put it simply. That doesn't mean they're always right or that there shouldn't be uh, legal obligations that they have, do's and don'ts in some ways, some limited ways, but in general, um, within, I think, just kind of basic, bounds of normal life, um, the decisions and leadership of parents is something unique and that really, I think God has designed to be special. And you can um, have kind of fake replacements for that. And, in our society today, where the family is breaking down in many sectors of society, where marriages are falling apart, children are being raised, and as it's sometimes called in the scholarship, mixed households, which is kind of a euphemism for, a revolving door of different people who have shared custody and all this mess that many kids are growing up in, um, and in that situation, because things are such a mess, um, there's a sense in which the state or some outside institution or person is going to kind of fill the role that a normal stable household led by parents would provide. And in some ways we can say that there's times when government perhaps can legitimately help people who are in desperate situations. We can debate what that might look like and when that's appropriate. But we can, at the same time, we realize when that happens, something has been lost because God's design is for that need to be addressed in the household or in the local church, or a helpful principle here is in the Christian tradition is the idea of subsidiarity, and that is the idea that problems are best addressed at the most proximate level. So if a child has that problem, it is best addressed by their parents. If the family as a whole is struggling with something, it's that they should bring that to their pastors and their friends from church who can, maybe an older mentor who can help them in their community, who knows them and who knows the challenges they're facing and the needs they have, and can really address that in a helpful way rather than in kind of a formulaic way that may or may not actually be helpful. And the further you get away from the location of the problem, the less likely you are to have a good solution. um, so that's not to say that the state can't help the needy at times or can't help, orphans, or for instance, but we recognize they're not likely to help them in the best way possible, because it's those difficulties are best addressed by people who know the person or are in proximity to that person. And so that's a long-winded way of answering the question, but the family is this institution that I think God has provided to be uniquely formative and uniquely helpful, uniquely designed and able to address not only address problems, but also help people in pursuit of what is good.
Hmm. No, I think that's really good. I think, what was the term that you used again when you referred to the closest uh, the closest I forgot, what's the word you use?
Yeah,
Sorry,
subsidiarity.
subsidiarity.
Yep.
I think that's super helpful concept for us. I didn't know there was a term for this. It was frankly a thought I had in my own head. I think this is where a lot of people get on the left side get confused with conservatives when we want to restrict the social safety net.
Yep.
You even have some conservatives want to, eliminate, completely the welfare state or whatever it might look like. They're like, that's the most unloving, most like selfish thing possible. Uh, but they don't understand. And I'm sure there's conservatives who might have like, I just want more money in my pocket. They're out there, I'm sure. But I think it is important for people on the left hand side and also for Christians who are conservatives. How should I think about these issues? I'm hearing some conservatives talking about, hey, I think we should limit the welfare state, but my Christian faith says I need to love my neighbor. How can I reconcile those two?
Mhm.
I think that's a very helpful concept for Christians to understand is like the reason why we're against a super vast welfare state is because the state cannot meet the needs necessary for the most needy in society. And it will ultimately just end up with very expensive very expensive budget for the government and will not get the same end goals, the same results as will if local nonprofit ministries, churches, ultimately meet the needs of people in their communities. Because what's different from when the state does it and when a church does it is there's someone who is doing this purely out of love for God and a love of their neighbor in that moment. Even a social worker, social workers are great. We're thankful for social workers, right? But there's even an aspect when they are serving the people that they have a case on. Two, they're overloaded. One thing is they're overloaded. The second thing is they are detached from them because sometimes they're from 35 minutes away from their community. So they're going 35, 40 minutes away because it's the southernmost part of the county or the city, and they're the northernmost part. So they're so separated where they can't truly meet the needs of that person. But if if the social safety net is released, where the tax burden upon the citizens are relieved, that's where Christians can ultimately come in and produce change and to meet them with their physical needs, but ultimately meet them with their spiritual needs. Because people who are on tough circumstances, what their ultimate need is, if they're not in Christ, is not, shelter, is not food. Although we want to provide them with those things, their ultimate need is to be spiritually made well, which can only be done through the Christian religion. So I think that's a really helpful aspect that you have mentioned. Um, I think that the last question I really want to focus on, outside of us focusing on how will we support the family as at Truth in the Public Square? What happens when the state assumes that role that's traditionally held by families? You've kind of touched on it a few moments ago, but if you wouldn't mind adding some things there, like what happens when the state takes over that role that families should be in place of?
Mhm. I think the biggest problem that arises when you going back to this idea of subsidiarity, when you uh, try to solve a problem that should be solved by within the household or within a community from the federal government or some agency. um, the one problem is the distance there, as we mentioned a moment ago. But if this becomes a consistent, uh, if problems increasingly are addressed by, centralized or distant authorities, people will adjust their expectations accordingly. And so when we're talking about the family, we think about things like, educating children and providing for their needs, training them just to be virtuous citizens, to be even to, to be to train them in the ways of the Christian faith. If we just kind of outsource these things to, other agencies entirely, then, we are there. The danger is, just expecting someone else to take care of all these things while we go about our own business. And then, um, you know, if we then later on down the road realize there's, our children are struggling or something, it's hard to like to switch gears then to be like, oh, okay, now I'm going to be involved after I've kind of been in this habit for a long time of just being detached and distant, trusting that someone else will take care of it. I think uh, that problem applies to many other things. Charity to the poor, for instance. There's a great little musing on this by Alexis de Tocqueville called A Memoir on Pauperism, and he's talking about the kind of the welfare state in 19th century Britain, and how the shift from kind of private charity to a public kind of charity, what it ended up doing is shifting expectations both among the poor and among everyone else that really were not helpful in the end. The poor just kind of have this expectation that the government will give them something, and so they become kind of entitled. And everyone else is just like, oh, well, why would I help a poor person? Because the government's going to help them anyway. And so there's even kind of it breaks down even the virtues that we want to see people have at the private level if we just outsource it all to the state. And so, in the household, there's responsibilities that parents have in society to raise children, and if we outsource all of those to the state, then everybody is going to become passive in areas that we can't afford to be passive in,
Mm.
and you know some people, this isn't to say that you can't entrust your children's education, to a good school, but even if you do that, as a parent, you should still have a, serious interest and oversight in that.
Mm.
So that, if these people to whom you've trusted your children are not doing their job, you step in. And
Mm.
so those are kind of some of the dangers I think that come when we
Mm.
do too much outsourcing with the work of
Mm.
the household.
Mm.
There's times when it's appropriate, but it should always be, it should always be viewed as sort of a delegation where there's still, the parents are still kind of the authority at the end of the day, even if someone else is doing the grunt work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you took a lot of out what I was going to kind of close on my comments on the family is in this question, but the state comes alongside the family, but doesn't overtake the family. Overtake the family, and so it is. If public school, if it's a great public school nearby you, or if it comes like down to finances, and I don't want to ridicule or bind any Christian's conscience for taking their kid to public school. Um, Depending on the public school, of course, but let's just say it's like it's a public school that you don't have to bind a Christian's conscience to send them there. Uh, yeah, like you must view it as a tool in your toolbox that's helping you raise your children, um, um, in large part in education. But you must also understand that education, the responsibility of educating your children, is ultimately on you, not the state, and that's a good thing. Because you know your children. I think a lot of your teachers love your children, but most parents love their kids more than teachers love their students. That's how it should be. And when it doesn't happen,
Hmm.
that's a sad thing. And we
Hmm.
are so
That's right.
grateful and thankful and praise God for teachers who love students who come from really rough and difficult backgrounds. But ideally, it should be. a mother and father being the primary educator in the home, and then public education can come on alongside it. That's what best suits the family. The last thing I want to talk about, and we'll just take a few moments here, is how will truth in the public square serve the family? How will truth in the public square serve the family? And I think that's mainly through producing resources, articles, and podcasts such as this, but also is, as our long-term plans is to ultimately um, equip Christians to engage in the public square, have our state representatives, our state legislators, and all the way up to, if you can influence your state rep, your United States representative, is to put forward policies that promote human flourishing, that promote the family, that ultimately serve to glorify the Lord and also serve the common good. Isaiah, is there any last comments you have on our mission here and the family?
Not too much to add. I think I would just reaffirm we want to, uh, you know, provide resources that help Christians understand how, God's vision for the family, and also how that relates to politics. So,
Yep. Yep. Well, thank you, Isaiah, once again for joining me on the podcast today. It's been very delightful to hear you talk about the family and how that can help us engage in culture and politics. Thank you.
thank you.